Markiplier. Vanish beating, channel deleting, Sour Patch Kids beefing, Emmy nominated. Mark Edward Fi- Fishback?
Mark Edward Fishbach.
Okay. Mark Edward Fishbach. I think I can say with confidence that Markiplier is probably one of the most universally well-known and successful content creators out there. No matter your opinion of him, you've probably at least heard of him in some form or another. At this point, at least in the gaming and Let's Play sphere, he's a YouTube titan, touting well over 30 million subscribers, averaging 1 to 5 million views per video, and he posts at least once a week. You've seen him on TV, at interviews, hosting panels, and talking on Logan Paul's podcast? Bit of a miss there, Mark, but I digress. You probably already know who he is. In fact, if you've clicked on this video, then I'd wager to say that you're also probably a fan just like me. Now, not to brag, but I've been subscribed to Markiplier since about 2014, and it's 2023. Jesus Christ. What I'm saying is that he's been around for a while and made a name for himself and managed to stick around and keep his success despite the rapidly evolving of YouTube as a platform and the culture of media creation and consumption as a whole. And that's a feat. But what can we chalk this up to? Luck? Definitely a factor, but other YouTubers who've gotten a lucky break can still find a way to shiver away into irrelevance. Skill? At content creation and technology? Oh yeah, absolutely. At video games? To be determined. But what else is there? Plenty of other YouTubers have good luck, are good at video game Let's Plays, have a fun and interesting personality, and still manage to lose their steam a couple years in. So what's kept Markiplier going for over a decade? Fan engagement. Now, I'm not saying the Markiplier fanbase is perfect. Every fandom has its set of weirdos who try their best to make everyone uncomfortable and go too far with things. Ew! But for the most part, my experience, at least in my years on Markiplier Tumblr, Twitter, and now TikTok, have been nothing but pleasant. There's just a really chill vibe among Markiplier fans that's been cultivated over the years. Fan collaboration on art, fiction, editing, and videos have created a powerhouse of Markiplier-themed content. And a big part of fan-created content lies in the YouTuber characters we create based on what we see in that YouTuber's videos. Now, let me elaborate by taking a step back into the past. I want to analyze one of Markiplier's most popular characters, one that's been featured on his channel almost since its inception. His design, his abilities, and where he fits in the overarching lore of Mark's creative endeavors. When you think of the word Darkiplier, what image comes to mind? This? Those are all Darkiplier, sure, but they're evolved, developed. When I look at these versions of Dark, I see the well-developed, well-portrayed character that Mark has slowly created over the years. I see the red and blue flashing glitches that signify his inner turmoil. I hear the high-pitched frequency that gives me a headache every time he's on screen. I hear him talk in eloquent, elaborate metaphors that shows his intelligence as a character. I recall the titular soundtrack that plays as the tragedy of his creation becomes clear. I see Dark, or what we've come to know Dark as. But when I was a kid, Darkiplier didn't look like this. In fact, when he was first introduced, he wasn't even called Darkiplier. He wasn't called anything, because back then, Darkiplier looked like this. That's it. That's the whole thing. Just sitting, staring at the camera for less than 20 seconds with some generic, spooky soundtrack. No fancy outfit, no signature music or high-pitched frequency or even any talking. And look at that face. I know it was 10 years ago, but that Photoshop is gnarly! I mean, it's slightly creepy for what it was. It gives you a little shiver up your back, maybe, if you're alone at night and all the lights are off. It may not seem like Dark, but back then, that's all the fans had. and they ran with it. The community created this persona of Darkiplier based on these momentary snippets of creepiness that Mark put in his videos sometimes. Sometimes Dark's appearances were sprinkled throughout regular Let's Play videos, with little shots of him staring at the webcam, telling us not to turn around, that there was something behind us. Other times he had entire skits dedicated to him. While not specifically named Darkiplier until later on, the skits that involved Mark being creepy, stalking, killing, or preying on others, even in a comedic way, were dubbed Darkiplier appearances by fans. Oh, sorry. By Markiplites. There's gotta be a better name for the fanbase than that. Even still, up until about 2017, Darkiplier had never fully been acknowledged in the lore of Mark's channel. Sure, he had mildly acknowledged the character in passing, but never really made any consistent efforts to flesh out a consistent personality or any type of backstory. In fact, he'd actually made a conscious effort to not allude to Dark too much, since many fans had actually ran with Dark and turned him into some suave, romantic character that woos viewers, not scares them. So Mark had saved any semblance of Darkiplier for his various scary edits, and fans would do what fans do. Make art and fan fiction of their version of Dark. There was actually a great disconnect with Mark's idea of Dark and the fans' idea of Dark, but I'll get into that later. Then came A Date with Markiplier. 2017. Now, I don't know about you guys, but A Date with Markiplier was actually the first type of video I've ever watched that utilized that clickable annotation feature to create a choose-your-own-adventure story, which I think is pretty freaking creative. But despite being a pretty new type of idea, Date was also special for another reason. Darkiplier was given a purpose and became an official character in the newly developing Markiplier Cinematic Universe, aka the better MCU.
Oh great, he came up with lore.
In A Date with Markiplier, you can happen upon a couple interactions with Dark, even managing to get an entire ending revolving around his character. And in watching, well, is it what? Okay. Is it watching or is it playing? Is it playing, since we're technically choosing what ending we want, so there is kind of a gaming element, but we're not actually playing a game instead of watching a series of pre-recorded videos? I'll just say watching. Okay, anyway, in watching A Date, you can come upon an option to watch either a romance movie or a horror movie. And obviously, since we all picked the horror movie first, we know that this is Darkiplier's first appearance in Date. And he opens with this. Instantly, we know this is Darkiplier. And instantly, it tells us everything we need to know about him. Let's break it down. Let's start with the visuals. All at once, the Darkiplier character is given his signature style that remains constant from here on out. Suit, tie, slicked hair, and eyeliner, I think? But he looks nice, right? He looks put together, charming, clean. This is a critical step in establishing him as the cunning, manipulative, smooth talker we know him as today. While later on this black suit gets traded in for a white one, it still establishes him as a well-groomed, presentable villain. Sidebar, I've actually seen speculation that since this suit goes from black to white, that the white version is actually a different character, but I'm not so sure about that theory, so I won't really be going into it when I get to In Space with Markiplier. I'll actually be treating all versions of Darkiplier from here on out as the same. And I say from here on out because I actually don't see this Darkiplier and this Darkiplier as the same character. I know for continuity reasons he is technically the same character, since this Darkiplier obviously didn't come out of nowhere, but I truly believe that Date sets the stage for him as the story's big bad. The story being whatever story Mark and team is trying to tell. And I'll get more detailed on that story later, but I did just want to throw this in there. They seem distinct from one another. Two eras that stay separate. One that focused on his small haunts, his mildly creepy behavior, and another that serves to portray him as an actual three-dimensional villain. But all of that is my opinion, so ignore it if you wish, and we will get back to the visuals. Now look at his body language, which almost acts as an extension of the outfit. In Date, we see him stand with his hands behind his back, casual tilt of the head, and the clip even opens with him greeting us with an open mouth, welcoming smile. Welcoming in heavy quotation marks, but we'll get to it. But it gives off a sense of stark intelligence, like he's cool, calm, collected, like he's executing a plan. Like he knows more than we do, and he knows more than we do and takes joy in it. When I look at Dark's body language in Date, I think of the word composure. He looks composed on the outside. Because in addition to the body language we see right in front of us, the visuals also show us that this facade of composure is exactly that, a facade. Throughout his story route, we see a faded, flashing version of Dark behind Dark. Most of the time, it's just a delayed image of what we're seeing in front of us, a creepy visual that adds to Dark's new spook factor. But there's actually a few things we gather from this that gives insight into how Mark has decided to portray this character. You see, a couple times throughout our interaction with Dark, the faded, glitching image behind him flashes. It's hard to explain with words, so just watch this clip really fast to see what I'm talking about.
Knowing that there are endless possibilities waiting for you. I can give you anything!
The regular Dark is sitting there smiling at us, having made a dinner date for us to go on, while the flashing behind him shows screaming. Anger? Pain? Either way, it gives us an indication that something isn't right here. Look at the difference in these flashes.
The visual here contradicts that of the smooth-talking, composed act that Dark is putting on. It shows us that he's not what he says he is. He can't be trusted. He's dangerous. He's got some kind of strong anger inside of him that he can't quite mask. Almost like it's ingrained into his very being. But we'll get to that. This is just another wonderful step that Mark has taken to develop Dark into the character he is today. These flashes, in conjunction with his design, tell us so much more than his words do. But they also tell us something else too, and while I talk about what else they mean, let me also bring up the glitches. Because another strong visual element that Dark has are these glitches. They are everywhere. They are here, 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 everywhere. They're creepy, spooky, definitely adds to the horror element, but, like I mentioned, they serve more than a strictly aesthetic purpose. They act as an indicator of Dark's abilities. You see, something we never knew before A Date with Markiplier was the extent of Darkiplier's powers. We never knew if he was just some weird serial killer persona, or if he was actually a horror entity with supernatural powers. I mean, even in the first video he appeared in, it's not, like, super clear if Dark is meant to be the scary face behind Mark or Mark himself. Probably because he never got that far. I personally don't think Mark really ever considered Dark as a whole character before this, so elaborating on his possible abilities probably wasn't on his mind before Date.
But here he had a chance to give this character some weight, some power, to make him more than a sketch character. So he gives us, the audience, some insight into the kind of power he has, and these glitches show us that he's not human. Sure, he may look it, he may talk it, but he's not human. He has some type of command over time and space that humans don't typically have, believe it or not. He pulls us from the movie theater into this black void, like his own dimension. Then there's a glitch, we're sitting at a table and he's conjured up dinner. His very being pulses with red and blue, almost like he exists more as an entity than he ever did a human. Another glitch, we're back in the real world. More glitches here to make it harder to see who the real Mark is, so we accidentally shoot him instead. This is another indicator that Dark isn't human, isn't of this world, because if you didn't ever notice, Dark doesn't cast a shadow. That's the hint Mark gives us as to who we should shoot, and if we do accidentally shoot the real Mark, more glitches at the end as we're pulled back into Dark's dimension, where we can...
Together. Forever.
I haven't even gotten to the sound yet, and already we've learned so much about what kind of character Dark is going to be, what kind of role he wants to play. We've learned that he can control time and space to a degree, can take us with him at his whim, and that he uses these abilities to trick others. We've learned that he's smart, he's manipulative, he's charming, and he's incredibly unstable. Speaking of sound, let's now talk about Darkiplier's sound design. There's not as much to say here before I talk about his dialogue, but it's still an incredibly important part of his character and definitely worth mentioning. I'm going to play the opening clip of Dark's introduction again, and tell me what you hear. What do you notice? The creaking, maybe. The idea that even the world we're in, the one of his own design, could crumble at any moment. The echo in his voice, another indicator that he is more being than human, that he transcends normal physics. Maybe you hear the slight British tinge that always manages to sneak its way into Mark's Darkiplier voice. But the most noticeable thing, once you know what it is the frequency that plays as soon as Dark comes on screen. When I first watched this route, I got a major headache, and it lasted 4 hours, and for the life of me, I could not figure out where it was coming from. It was like my brain was rattling. But after a rewatch of this route, I realized it was because of the high-pitched frequency playing the entire time we interact with Dark. His voice was so loud and commanding during my first watch, I didn't even notice it until I was knee-deep in a migraine. Even now, I love watching this route, but I can't watch it too often because the sound physically makes me ill. This frequency, to me, is the sound that defines Dark. You hear it, you know he's there. And I think this was a fantastic choice on Mark's part. So seldom does a villain jump out of the screen like that, actually physically getting inside my head. The level of discomfort I get watching Dark scenes skyrockets when this sound plays. It almost reminds me of the high-pitched string instruments that play right before a jump scare. Listen to this. Now, I know they're not the exact same sound, but it's what it reminds me of. The discomfort of knowing that a bigger scare is coming, the waiting and unease, the unsettling anticipation, the relief when the boogeyman finally reaches out from under the bed. But with Dark, there is no bigger scare. The pin never drops. The sound forces you to sit there in your discomfort, confront it as Dark talks to you. It tells you there will be no relief, no reprieve, just you and him forever. It's brilliant. I love the choices that have been made for Dark's character in A Date. I love the questions that come up for us because of this audio and visual cues. How does he do these things? Where does this power come from? What is he doing with what's his goal? I wish I could tell you that his actual dialogue provides answers, since if you haven't noticed, I haven't actually talked about the things he says yet. But unfortunately, the things he actually says only provides us with more questions. But before that, I did want to say this. The 2017 Darkiplier is Mark's Dark. It's his character in his own way, and in a way, this new Dark almost serves as a bridge between what fans want a Darkiplier to be and what Mark wants him to be. Mark notes that fans started to see Dark as this romantic character, one of seduction, of care. And in this new portrayal, Mark is saying, hey man, this guy is not anything like that. He doesn't care about you enough to romance you. But even still, his character does have this element of seduction. He wears a clean-kept suit, the type of thing you'd see going on a date with someone. He offers you dinner. He literally says, I can give you everything. So there is kind of a little bit that element of romance, but the way it's written is tied into what his character is at his core. A manipulator, a liar, someone who can't be trusted. He misuses these elements of seduction and romance to manipulate you into trusting him. He wants to catch you off guard. He wants you to believe he is your ally, your friend, but he isn't. But I love that about him. I love this character, and that's how you know he's written well, even upon this first real meeting with him, because even though I know right off the bat that he would stab me in the back the first chance he gets, I still love this character. This is weird, but he kind of reminds me of Scar, in a way, from The Lion King. Like, Scar is such an obvious villain from the beginning, and he uses his charm and charisma to manipulate others around him in order to achieve his end goal. He uses his likability as a weapon, and he's my favorite character in The Lion King. He kills Mufasa on screen in front of his young son, then sends hyenas to kill his nephew also on screen. And I still love this character. A well-written villain is one that you cannot help but love, and I love this villain. Okay, now let's talk about the dialogue here. I equate it most to the Scott Cawthon method of writing, in that I think Mark had some idea of what he wanted Dark's story, motivations, and goals to be, but he didn't know the details, so he couldn't elaborate as much as he could have when writing A Date with Markiplier. I think fan theories snuck their way into later installments, adding back that fan element into Dark's character, but when we first meet him here, he talks rather vague. Still, the things he does say clues us into some of his inner workings. Take the very first thing he says to us. What does this tell us? Well, he's addressing you directly. He knows who you are. Now, who we are in this specific story versus who we are in other stories vary, so I can't say for sure who we're supposed to be in this exact scenario, but we do know that he knows us, and he knows that we know him. I speculate that we're simply watching as an audience member rather than a character like the district attorney in Who Killed Markiplier, but that's just me. Throw your own theories down below. Regardless, he knows us, and we know him. That's the first line. Take a look at the second.
I've been waiting a long time to see you again. I've been pushed aside, replaced, mocked.
Here, we learn he's been waiting to see us again. Almost like he's wanted to make himself known, but couldn't for some reason. It shows us that perhaps he isn't as overpowered as we think he is, that in some weird way he can be controlled by other forces as he controls us. It starts sprouting some questions in our mind about backstory. Here, he lays the seeds for what we'd eventually learn about him. But he goes on. The clip here is a bit long, so let me summarize. He says, and then he had the gall to not invite me on this little adventure with you. No more, never again. It's my turn now. I've been waiting patiently. He promised he would let me in again. I'm tired of giving people a choice. Dark talks about him. Some he that we don't know has the ability to keep Dark away from us, and now he wants his turn. He's been waiting for this he to choose to let him in again. The he, we gather, is probably Markiplier, since we were just on a date with him, right? But that adds some more interesting information into the mix. It tells us less about Dark, actually, and more about Mark. It raises questions, because Dark is shown to have incredible power, but if Mark is the he that Dark is referring to, what does that say about Mark? What kind of power does he hold? Is this Mark we're going on a date with the same Markiplier that we already know? Or is this a different version of him that Mark's written without us even noticing? What is Mark able to do that keeps Dark at bay for so long, and what's keeping him from doing it to us? Side note, I realize that Dark says he's tired of giving people a choice, but given what we learn about him later down the line, I doubt he ever had much of a choice to begin with. It's almost like losing a promotion you were gunning for, and then to make yourself feel better, you say, oh, I didn't even want it anyway. I digress. Moving on. The dialogue pokes at something even deeper than simply providing somewhat of a backstory. It shows that something else is happening here. Now, Dark is a villain, and he will manipulate you to get what he wants, there's no doubt about that. But something about this dialogue could indicate a bigger bad, that something else is in control, more control than Dark. Something we aren't even aware enough of to be privy to, much less to find and stop. It indicates that while we shouldn't trust Dark, maybe we shouldn't trust Mark either.
I love this job! Bigger boot!
Now, could he be lying? Sure. Could I be falling right into the charismatic smooth-talking trap? Of course. But considering the way things go later on, I don't think I'm far off here. I think the dialogue is purposefully vague and it makes us crave more, not only as real life viewers, but also as a character in Mark's story. See, Mark has a way of turning the viewer into a character that affects the direction of the story itself, and that started with Date. So not only do we as fans want to know all the answers, he makes it so that we as players, as characters, need the answers to finish the story properly. And God, I love everything about it. Okay, I've gone on for a long time, like 20 minutes, and I've gotten through 4 minutes of footage. So let's try and speed this up. So I'm actually going to jump forward past Who Killed Markiplier, since I personally see it as providing definitive answers to some of the questions I just raised, and there's far more to be talked about there. So instead, I'm going to jump ahead to A Heist with Markiplier and In Space with Markiplier. There may be some missing context in doing so, but I'll explain those moments as they come. But that being said, let's start with Heist. In Heist, you can once again enter a story route that brings you face to face with Darkiplier, and this appearance gives us some more insight into his character, his motivations, and his abilities. Let's break the sequence down bit by bit and talk about what it means. Here, we turn down a hallway, which was supposed to be a tunnel, meaning that Dark has already started to mess with our location. Down this hallway, we see several pictures of characters that are featured in Who Killed Markiplier: Ben, the chef, etc. Each portrait has their eyes crossed out. We can assume that Dark put these portraits here, once again illustrating his ability to manipulate spaces and objects. We also hear echoes of their voices as pulled from the series, adding another tick to his ability to screw with sound and time. And I wasn't going to include the Project Damien in this, since the Darkiplier appearance wasn't even really there, but I will note something here. The echoing of voices from characters we've met before, saying things we've heard before, is something that happens both here and in the Project Damien. So there could be some correlation there, but I am not savvy enough to figure out what it is, and that's all I'll say about the Project Damien. Back to the sequence. In the hallway, our phone dings, and we see we're now receiving text messages from an unknown number, one we have to assume is from Dark, yet we never see him holding a phone, so this shows that he now has the ability to manipulate modern technology. This isn't something we've seen before, so it's nice to see such an evolution. There's yet another glitch, and suddenly we're pulled back into Dark's world, that ever-present black void. We see a picture of Mark in a robe standing on the stairs. I'll get more into the significance of this later. The portrait starts to crumble as Dark's voice creeps in with that familiar high-pitched frequency, and he says this.
Same snake, different skin.
And suddenly he appears. And he looks a little different. Sporting an entirely new suit, this is a different Dark than we've seen in Date. Why is this? Why go from a dark suit and tie to a stark white? There's been some theories. One, like I mentioned, is that this is an entirely new character, since he actually never names himself as Dark. I don't subscribe to this theory, since there's not much, if any, evidence of this being the case. There's also some theories on whether or not this is an indication of a different side of Darkiplier fronting, as it were, which explains the suit change. Again, I don't really buy this theory. Personally, I see 2 reasons for the suit change. One practical and one symbolic. Let's start with symbolic. Earlier in the video, I talked about how Dark's initial dialogue hints at a bigger evil at play in the story Mark's trying to tell. How there's a stronger entity stringing us along like puppets, controlling how much Dark is able to show himself or control the world around him. And that entity is trying to fool us into thinking that Dark is the main villain when he's not. Now, he is a villain, I think, but we can gather by now that he's not the main one. He's not in total control. So perhaps the reason for the suit changing from dark to light is supposed to be symbolic of how our perception of Dark changes over the course of these videos, that in the beginning of Date we saw him as the big bad, but by the time of Heist in Space, we know now that that's not the case. He's more of a secondary villain, almost a red herring, and his white suit indicates that. The color of white often symbolic of purity, of light, of good. So the suit change could indicate his attempt to get the viewers to see him as one of the good guys, a tragic victim of the larger bad guy at play here. Whether this was a symbolic choice on Mark's part to make Dark sympathetic, or a calculated move on Dark's part to trick us into thinking he can be trusted, I don't know. Let me know what you think. But the second theory, and the one I think is the actual truth, comes from a real-life creator, storytelling, technical perspective. In Date, Heist, and Space, Darkiplier's world is this weird black void with no definition or walls. It just seems to go on forever, and the only time anything is in it is when Dark himself conjures it up. And basically, Wearing such a dark colored suit kind of causes Dark's silhouette to melt into the background where some of his features and behaviors are lost. He blends in a little too much, so this kind of necessitated a slight change in the design of Darkiplier's character. I personally think keeping the background slate black was the better choice in my opinion. I just don't think he'd be as scary with like blue or pink or something. So changing the suit from black to white made him have a starker contrast against the background, so we got more out of his movements and facial expressions. Also, I believe that at some point before the change, a fan made some art of Dark in a white suit, and Mark said he liked the idea so much that he wanted to steal that design, so that's probably also a reason why. Yet just another point to my list of why this version of Dark serves as a bridge of what the fans wanted Dark to be versus what Mark wanted Dark to be. Anyway, he starts speaking to us, giving us those eloquent metaphors I was talking about earlier. He speaks of that infamous he, spinning webs, spinning lies. He talks of how we must be feeling trapped in his, again, presumably Mark's, games. And then he says this.
I know the feeling.
A few things just happened here. For one, Dark assumes by now that we know who he is, and of course, because of who killed Markiplier, again, I will explain, we do. In this, a new character is established. The biggest bad is introduced, and it's who the fandom refers to as Actor Mark. This version of Mark is not Mark the YouTuber. It is not Mark Edward
Fishbach.
IRL Mark. It's kind of a self-insert to an extent. It's meant to be Mark, yes, but Mark of a different universe, of a different origin. A universe where Mark isn't the friendly, goofy internet personality we know and love. This actor Mark is actually just as, if not more, of a manipulator than we ever thought Dark to be. Because we also learn that whatever games and lies he spun, not only have we fallen victim to them apparently, but so has Dark. Because something else we learn here is that the lies, the games that Dark is saying Actor Mark creates, they are the very videos we're watching. The choose your adventure story we're playing right now. Think to the texts that Dark sends you. He talks of it feeling like we're going in circles. And in these circles, he refers to the gameplay loop that we're in, how we circle back to choose different options, how each ending is so radically different from one another, how things change so drastically, so quickly, how we even die and come back just to start over, just to try to get the ending we want. Now read the other text he sends. No one seems to question it. With this, he's saying that you two seem to be the only ones aware of the loop. That every time we circle back, we have to rewatch at least one video over again to make a different choice. But no matter how often we rewatch the same video, the characters act the exact same, no matter what had happened prior. Think Sans from Undertale. You and he are the only two in this world realizing what you're trapped in. And that's why he says he knows the feeling. How does this manage to pack itself into a few pieces of dialogue? Okay, moving on. Something else we notice here is that Dark is acting much more playful than his previous incarnations. In between his glitching, we see him sitting behind this desk he conjures up, on top of it, even at one point lounging on it like he's some kind of supernatural pinup girl. He even says this.
Maybe you just miss my pretty face.
His dialogue has switched from extremely vague and extremely spooky to mildly vague and mildly spooky. It's just a new aspect to his personality is all, and one I like. I think it cements this idea of Dark falling on the back burner in terms of being a villain for the series. Not that he won't always be a fan favorite and an interesting character overall, but in Heist, I think we see some evidence that maybe Mark doesn't quite know what to do with the character literarily anymore. And no, this tangent isn't just an excuse for me to find a natural reason to say my favorite word. Literarily. Besides this scene, there's not much else of Dark to be seen in Heist, actually, and as far as his role, again, not super relevant story-wise when we consider Heist by itself. In this story, his role isn't only to manipulate you. It's actually pretty removed from the in-universe events. He says this.
Throughout this heist, I've hidden codes. Several codes. Find them all, and you'll get your truth.
At first, these codes seem to have some amazing significance, but really, they lead to a website that shows Heist's behind-the-scene footage, which, it really is a cool way to plug the website, but doesn't serve a huge story role, and besides that, there doesn't seem much else for him to do. And not that I fault Mark for this, because Who Killed Markiplier, his story is pretty cohesive there, and there isn't much else place for him to go. Despite that though, I love this version of Dark. He's more fun, and the white suit is a major improvement. Even his glitching and flashing is more refined and used more intentionally, which I find much easier on the eyes. And while I'm not a fan physically of that frequency that always plays, I still find it to be the perfect sound cue for a character like him. Okay, let's touch briefly on space. There's almost no Dark appearance in this one, since the storyline focuses so much more heavily on this contained story about the engineer and the captain getting stuck in their own time loop and trying to save the ship, blah, 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 blah. But there is a brief clip. There are a few things here we can decipher, despite the role he plays here being small. First, we see that he still seems to be wearing the same suit from Heist, indicating that the character design is carried over and will probably remain consistent from here on out. Of course, his signature sound cue is there, that familiar ringing. Real quick, let me break down this sequence. We see this crystal thing on the ground that has some correlation with the time loop we, the captain, are stuck in. Dark comes to frame as we're staring at it on the ground and picks it up, and his dialogue echoes his previous dialogue from Heist. This, again, is another vague nod to the fact that Dark knows more about what's going on here than he ever lets on. It also shows that the box from Heist and the crystal from space are connected in some way. Now, this may not seem like a lot. It's much less than what we saw of him in Heist. But I think it could be an indication that maybe Dark will start to play a bigger role in the stories to come. I mean, he's making projects all the time. Who's to say that one of his future projects will continue the stories of Heist in space, where Dark's involvement in both will continue to grow? Again, I feel as if Mark wasn't too sure what to do with him yet, since his story's pretty much been told, but this snippet here shows the potential, at least, for him to play a bigger part. Now, whether that part is on our side or the antagonist's side is to be seen. Like we've established, he's kind of a gray area villain at this point, not quite evil, not quite good. We still can't trust him, of course, but I wonder where his character will go from here, and I am excited to see it. Okay. This has been a long-ass video, and I'm thankful to those who are still watching and willing to listen to me info dump about character design and sound and lighting and all that jazz. I realize most of this video is just me rambling about my special interest, but there is still more to cover, so please stick around. Before I get into the main dish, aka Who Killed Markiplier, I do want to touch on Darkiplier versus Antisepticeye and why I'm not including it in his character evolution. For one, I think it's clear enough that this video is a joke, since, you know, Logan Paul is in it. Dark Chica? Although it's nice to imagine Dark having a Dark Chica, that would literally be hilarious. It just doesn't really fit into the seriousness of his arc as a whole. Plus, we both know Dark would never forget to feed his dog if he had one. Also, the video as a whole is pretty corny. One might even say cringy. And while I love it for what it is, I'm just not including it here because I don't really count it, and you can yell at me if you want to. Anyway, jumping back in time now to the events of Who Killed Markiplier. I'm sorry for any confusion that's been incurred along the way. I'll try to tie up all my loose ends here because I feel like this is the ultimate character evolution for Dark. It's his origin story, which is like, oh my god, fans have been begging for an origin story for years and he just casually drops it into our lap over this 4-episode series. But let me contain myself enough to get the basic context out of the way because I'm literally shaking. As I'm recording this, I'm getting myself so excited. Because of course, this series isn't just about Darkiplier. There's actually quite a few new characters introduced in this story, even characters who would get their own spin-off stories down the line. Speaking of, even though I won't be analyzing every character in the show, even though I'd like to, let me know if you want to see more of these character evolutions, but there are some characters I need to talk about for you to understand Dark's role in this. The main characters you need to know for the origin story of Darkiplier are as follows: Damien, Celine, the District Attorney, and actor Mark. Yes, this is where actor Mark starts to become important, but let me start with the District Attorney. Who Killed Markiplier is yet another instance where the story is told from the first-person perspective, and we, the viewer, are treated as another character in the story. In this story, we play as the town's newly employed District Attorney. Not much else to say about us as a character, as we have no actual lines in the story, yet surprisingly play a big role in the story's finale, but moving on to Damien and Celine. Damien and Celine are twins, with Damien being younger by only 10 minutes. Damien is the town you live in's mayor. His character is subdued, caring, intelligent, and mostly kind. He usually only lashes out when he's incredibly angry or when his sister gets under his skin. Celine doesn't hold a governmental position in this town, rather a mystical one. She is a seer, and implied to have powers to see visions, sixth senses, and other magical happenings. Selene actually doesn't appear until later in the story, but it's shown that she only appeared because she sensed that something was going wrong. Selene's personality is a little more hot-headed. She can run into things without thinking, and is prone to being a little more independent, more authoritative, and more fiery than Damien. How else could I describe it? If you could, assign a color to Damien's and Selene's personality based on how they act and who killed Markiplier, one might assign the color blue to Damien's personality, representing water, flow, calm, patience, and one might then arbitrarily assign the color red to Selene's personality, representing fire, chaos, intensity, and then one might think back to how the colors of Darkiplier's glitches feature both red and blue. Maybe you can see where this is going. The next major player here is Actor Mark. Now, the official character name in the show is Markiplier, but for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to refer to this in-universe character as Actor Mark, as dubbed by the fandom. Actor Mark owns the mansion that we're visiting for a party that he's hosting for some reason. The one that Damien is also at, and the one that Selene eventually crashes, and also the one that creates Darkiplier. Now, if you haven't gathered, Actor Mark is the big bad of Who Killed Markiplier, and implied to be the same in Heist and Space. Now, I can admit here that I haven't watched the entirety of Heist and Space explanation streams, so a lot of the lore may be lost here. I am simply trying to give enough context so that Markiplier's origin makes sense. Back to the story. Actor Mark was married to Selene. It's implied that he's a rather shitty husband. Like I said, this version of Mark is not the nice, funny internet man we all know and love. If you recall the actor route and ending from A Date with Markiplier, it's essentially that personality but tenfold. So eventually, Selene, either desperate for affection from someone who actually cares or is too frightened to leave the relationship before seeing someone else, cheats on Mark with his best friend, William the Colonel. At this revelation and the loss of millions despite his supposedly successful acting career, Actor Mark tries to kill himself while in his mansion, yet some mysterious magic that the mansion possesses brings him back to life. In fact, he tries to kill himself many times, every time being brought back to life and every time losing a little bit more of himself along the way. So he decides to host this party to trick and manipulate everyone there for his own sick, twisted game, since he's found that he can't die. Think Flowey from Undertale. Now, I could be missing things, and if I am, please let me know, but long story short, you're there, Damien and Selene are sisters and brothers, blue and red respectively, and Actor Mark lives in a magic mansion that sends him to the upside down every time he tries to kill himself. Sound good? Okay, let's actually move on to Darkiplier himself. Darkiplier is made up of multiple beings. In Chapter 4 of Who Killed Markiplier, our character, the district attorney, falls off a balcony and it's implied we die. But since we're under the control of the mansion's magic, we wake up in the Upside Down place. And wouldn't you know it, that Upside Down place seems to be an expansive, echoing black void. Huh! And Actor Mark's body falls into the frame, which is just so creepy. I hate it. But then we come face to face with Selene and Damien, where it's implied that some kind of disaster at the mansion also killed them and brought them to this place as well. Selene is outlined in a red, flashing image of herself, and Damien is outlined in a similar flashing glitch, except for him, it's blue. I wonder why. They explain to us that their powers combined, they can send us back to life. But we won't come back the same. And we don't. We come back as our body, but our person is permanently damaged. Something has changed. Let me give another quick breakdown of this sequence and I'll try to piece it together. After getting back, we wake up from the bottom of the balcony. William has been holding us all night and essentially loses his mind once he sees us rise back up from the dead, but that's for a different video. We stand up and we stand next to a mirror. Below us, we see Damien's cane that he used to carry with him. We pick it up, and if you notice, the hand that picks up the cane is not the one we've seen throughout the show, so it's safe to assume that not even our body is the same anymore. Instead, we're using a mangled, bastardized version of Damien's body. And as the tragic music swells, the piano that defines the entire Who Killed Markiplier series, we look up and see ourselves in a mirror. But it isn't us. It's Darkiplier. Blue and red, glitching, deeply angry Darkiplier. He cracks his neck, and so with it cracks the mirror, symbolizing the reality that we are forced to accept, that this house, these people, Actor Mark, we made Darkiplier. We are part of fractals forced into a picture frame in which we would never fit. Think of a gem fusion in Steven Universe, except our fusion is like super messed up and unstable. We are broken, and Dark is broken, filled with anger, stung by betrayal, overwhelmed with fear, with confusion, with chaos, with an anger towards actor Mark for trapping us all in this game. He stands there for a few seconds, breathing heavy, thinking, planning revenge against Mark and you and the world, and he runs away, leaving you, the district attorney, there, trapped in that house, that mirror, forever, as he runs off to enact his revenge, and thus, Darkiplier is born. And that's it. Now, if you're asking why I've done this so out of order in terms of timeline, I wasn't trying to analyze the entire story as a whole, I was just trying to analyze Darkiplier as a character, which clearly got messy very quickly. If I lost any of you with how all over the place I was, I apologize. And to those of you who stuck with me, thanks for sticking with me. Not to make excuses, but this is my first serious YouTube video, like, ever. And with it being so long, clearly I may have been overambitious, but for what this is, I am proud of it. Really, I just wanted to talk about Dark's character design and mannerisms and what they mean for the larger plot at hand. Mark's channel and shows have been there with me since I was a kid, and now I'm an adult, and it's really strange to have been there long enough to look at things through a retrospective lens, because in the real time span of things, 10 years isn't that long. Not even half a blink in the universe's eye, but this content was here for me. So this, I guess, is also a sort of thank you to Mark and team for being a creative inspiration. If you liked this video, go ahead and subscribe. I usually write poetry and short stories, so YouTube script writing and video editing is a media format I've yet to master, but I want to continue to learn, so more videos will definitely be made in the future, whether about Mark or any other of my interests. As a treat, I'll let you know that I want to make a video on why Cars 3 is the best Cars movie, so if that's something that interests you, stick around. And if there's another Markiplier character you want me to analyze, let me know. Also, if there's anything I got wrong lore-wise, also let me know. I'm not good at that kind of stuff, and I live for interacting with the community, so let me know how you enjoyed the video. I'm B, and I will see you next time.